Hmm.
Thanks, Don.
Joy,
Thank you.
Mr. Water.
Okay, so I think everyone is here now. I will ask the people on stage, so Srinath, Julia, Matija, to just mute yourself, and you can have your cameras off while Nikola is speaking. So our first speaker today is Nikola Jurković from Croatia. And I think he's going to introduce himself in his talk, so I'm just going to skip the introduction part and let the stage to Nikola. So you can share your screen.
Okay, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so hi, I'm Nikola. I was first at the summer school in 2017, and I'm gonna tell you a bit about my story and how we started the study abroad section in our newsletter. Well, it all starts in 2017 when I was on Esri for the first time, and that's me at the top. This was my first time I was exposed to the field of foreign academia at all. I never really had any contact with people from other countries who are into science. In high school, I dabbled a lot in competitions and in engineering, and I did a lot of stuff with my friends regarding Arduino projects. We did 3D printers, we worked on Tesla coils, and we made a CNC. So that was all in my free time, kind of. I discovered early on a book which changed my view on college admissions as a whole. It was Cal Newport's How to Be a High School Superstar. And in it, this is the gist of the book. Getting into a good college doesn't have to be a reward for extreme sacrifice. It can be, instead, a side effect of the much grander goal of building a meaningful and engaging life. So it sounds very prosaic, but I kind of used this book as a guide on how to go through high school. I was in my third year of high school. I was at the competition. It was the European Olympiad in physics, and there we had a talk, and the person holding the talk told us that we shouldn't really look at the geographic location of a university to determine whether we should study at that university. We should primarily focus on the quality of the education. So if it happens that we will get a better education somewhere other than our own country, then we should try to study there. And with that mentality, I decided that I would try to apply to US colleges. One thing I liked a lot about the US admission system is that it doesn't really look at you as a number. It looks at you as a person with everything you did. And in Croatia, it's a lot different. In Croatia, there's a system where they look at basically two numbers for everyone. It's your results on the standardized tests, and it's your grades. So it kind of treats everyone as a number. In the US, it's a lot more well-rounded. And one thing was that I didn't really have that good grades, and I had much more accomplishments outside of school than inside of school. One thing about the US is that it has a lot of universities which are among the best in the world. So if you look at the leaderboards for universities, chances are that around half of the universities on the leaderboards will be from the US. So by applying to the US, you cover a lot of terrain at once. So you can apply to like 15 universities, which are in the top 50 in the world. to determine if my applications are actually worth doing, I thought as a gambler. So I guesstimated the probability of success and what the reward would be if I succeeded at studying in the US. And I just had to compare it to what it costs to attempt to study. And I determined that that number was around 200. And anything over 1 means that it's a good bet. So if it's 200, that means it's the best bet you'll do in your life. I did make a lot of mistakes during admissions. I didn't have an advisor. I didn't really pay that much attention to deadlines, so I did miss some deadlines. I misplaced some documents. It wasn't very professionally done. And one thing that was in my benefit was that I applied to a lot of universities, to around 15. So if there was very little chance that everyone would deny me. That was my thought process. And it paid off because I was accepted to 2 universities, one of which was Harvard, which was on a large part due to luck on my part that they accepted me, having in mind the mistakes I made. And after being accepted, I started to get a lot of emails from high schoolers about the admissions process. And I noticed that a lot of them were asking the same questions. So, and I kind of thought, is it better to reply to, let's say, 100 people at once, or is it easier to reach 100 people through YouTube? So I decided to make a YouTube channel where I talk about the US admissions process. And sadly, that channel is in only Croatian, but maybe you could watch it with subtitles if you're from any other country than Croatia. But for the next admissions process, I will probably make a wholly translated channel. So subscribe. After covering most of the admissions process on my YouTube channel, I joined the S3 blog team, and there we started a new section of the blog called Study Abroad. And in this section, we go through why you should study abroad and through specific countries and how to apply to universities in those countries. We write the posts by using a survey, which we send to students who are currently in college. So if you are in college, we would greatly appreciate it if you could fill out the survey and help us in creating this series. Currently, we are only focused on bachelors. The countries we covered so far are the US, the UK, Germany, and Belgium. And we are planning to cover many more. Look out for France and Canada in the near future. If you are interested in applying to foreign colleges at all, which I think you should be, because just look at it through the lens of the number of countries which are not your home country are much greater than 1. So odds are you are probably going to find a better education outside of your own country. And especially because some people define education as the broadening of one's horizons. And I think that if you study abroad, you can broaden your horizons a bit more. If you're interested in studying abroad, here's the process for some countries. Well, this is more of a general view on the process. It isn't specific. So, in a nutshell, there's standardized testing. So most countries require that you fill out well, some sort of test. In the US, it's the ACT and the SAT. And many other countries accept the SAT and the ACT, and many colleges have their own tests as well. There's also language tests, so probably most universities require that you demonstrate some proficiency in the language that you're going to study in. There's applications where you fill out your personal info, your family info. You can write essays and motivational letters. You can get your teachers or mentors to write recommendation letters for you. There's scholarships, which is very specific based on the country and based on the college. For instance, in the US, every college gives out its own scholarships. In the UK, it's mostly based, well, it's also based on specific colleges. In some countries, it's actually given by the country. There's interviews, which mostly take place currently online, because one, because of COVID, and two, because most often you won't really have anyone to interview in your area. Most interviews aren't really about testing your knowledge. They're more about seeing who you are and why you apply to the university. UK is specific for having colleges which are mostly ones that test your knowledge. There's also additional materials. So some universities permit you to send portfolios, like artistic portfolios or computer science portfolios or engineering portfolios or scientific papers which you worked on. So you don't really have to rely on grades or test results. You can also add the stuff you worked on outside of school. And if you are a fourth-year high school student, then it's a bit late to apply to the US and to the UK, but other countries, you're safe for this year. Any questions? All right, I have to look at the questions.
I can also read them. It's kind of normal. Okay,
right.
So first of all, thank you so much for the talk, Nikola. It's really inspiring, and we're proud of you as our own superstar, high school superstar. So the question is from Adam, who asks, was it hard to transition from Croatia to the USA? And where do you like it more?
Right. I think I'm one of the rare students who, when you ask them how it is in the US, I have to answer, I don't know. I've never been. Because due to COVID, I had to take a gap year. Well, I could have chosen between online studying for 1 year or taking a gap year. So I took a gap year. And I'll only start studying in fall of 2021. So I'm not a normal student yet.
Okay. Do you know how it goes in practical terms? Like, for example, do you have to find accommodation before going there, or how does it go?
Right. I'd say that most universities have a very developed campus culture. So I think, like at Harvard, around 95% of students are on campus. So you'll be applying to campus at the same time as applying to university. So you probably won't need to find any other accommodation. It will be just at the university.
Okay. If anyone else has a question, you can either type it or ask for a microphone, so raise a hand. Otherwise, I have one last question. So for the interview phase, do you have any tips and tricks on how to prepare yourself for such interviews?
I suggest that you look through, there's a great subreddit. It's called Applying to College. And there they have great guides on interviews and all that. The most important tip I would say is to pay a lot of attention to the emails you get and to how to enter the interview, because due to my own lack of looking at the email, I actually was late to an interview because I didn't realize that the link to the interview was in the email. So pay a lot of attention, and yeah, just look at the guides from the people who are better in interviews than me.
Okay, so I guess that's it. We'll move on. Wait, something popped up. Okay, so Tomas asks, how do I convince my parents to take 1 year, I guess, a gap year? He says he was thinking about doing it, but they're not really into it. How did your parents react?
That's a tough question. Well, I think that one important part is that I'm assuming that you're taking a gap year to apply next year. And I think it's quite a bit harder to go to actually apply to US universities if you are a transfer student from another country. I think it's much simpler and much easier to do it if you aren't in a university currently. And well, about I don't really know how to solve your problems with your parents, but I'd say hit them with the gambler's equation.
Okay. Or you can introduce them to friends from abroad. I think in some places, if I'm not mistaken, Holland and Belgium, it's quite common to take a gap year and only then actually enroll into university. So you can try to play on that.
Right. Yeah, in Croatia, it's quite uncommon to take a gap year.
Yeah. Okay. If you think of more questions, you can find Nikola later on at the tables, or you can also direct message him. So yeah, he will be around. Okay. So thank you once more, Nikola.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Julia. Julia is one of those people who come to the S3 once and then never leave. So she was a participant in 2017, 18, then the project leader in 2019. She was supposed to lead the project also this year, but it was cancelled. But she's going to do it next year. So Julia is from Germany, and she's going to talk first about her university, which is a bit of a special place. And then she's going to talk also about a passion of hers, which is dark patterns. So yeah, the floor is yours, Julia.
Thank you so much. Yes, so my two topics, as Nicolina said, are not super related, but the way they relate is through me. So I hope to be the intersection between my topics. Does everyone see my screen, hopefully?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, I don't need much of an introduction since you did that for me. Thank you. I am Julia, and I study in Berlin at Code University of Applied Sciences. I study product management, and you'll probably be thinking now, okay, what is product management? And I'm happy to go into that, but that's not the focus of my presentation. So if you want to know more, ask me a question, and I'm happy to answer, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So starting off with my first topic, which is, let me just, okay. Yeah, there we go. Which is applied sciences. Well, for those of you who aren't in university yet, this is especially relevant because when I was still in school, I actually didn't really realize until the very last month all the different types of universities out there. And I will only be speaking for Germany because that's where I'm most what I'm most familiar with. But I'm sure that it's very similar in other countries, actually. So first of all, applied science, as most of you know, it is the application of science to, wait a minute, sorry, my screen is help. Wait a minute, why is this? There we go, perfect. Sorry about the interruption. So it is a discipline where you apply existing scientific knowledge to develop more practical applications, right? And so while in natural science, you use pure science to develop information to explain natural phenomena in the world, In applied sciences, you use this information and put it into practical use. And applied science is generally engineering, which develops technology and is like the creation of new inventions. However, there can also be dialogue between pure science and applied science. So research and development obviously have like a strong intersection. And one example of an applied science, for example, that has this intersection is medical microbiology. That would be an example of an applied science, but it still has a very like strong focus on natural sciences, right? So moving on to the next slide. I'm going to just go into the two different types of universities in Germany. Again, like I said, I think it's similar in other parts of the world. There are just traditional universities, right? And then there are, which you should be more familiar with, and then there are universities of applied sciences. And traditional universities have a heavy focus on research and theory and little practical experience and are quite academically oriented. And often after your master's, you can it is often that people pursue a PhD after their master's. So this is also possible with normal universities, and this is probably the most important thing. If you're interested in doing a PhD, you should not go to a University of Applied Sciences because they don't actually offer PhDs, and it's very hard to be accepted for a doctorate program if you have a degree of applied sciences. So remember that it's like if you take anything away from this presentation, that is really a very big difference between the two. And while universities often focus they either specialize in one specific subject area, for example, there are technical universities here or medical universities, they can also offer many different subjects that you can take together. Now going to universities of applied sciences, they're much more practical and hands-on. They often focus on developing specific skills for a certain profession. And thereby you also are more likely to encounter work experience opportunities or projects where you really get hands-on practical experience with certain companies or like just that branch that you're going into, and you really in a sense are prepared for a certain career. And there tends to be more communication between professors and students, and also tends to be more of a like lecture debate format, because again you're applying all the knowledge that you're getting. You're not just receiving it and having to memorize it, but you actually have to do something with this and I apply it either in a work experience or in a project, and I'll go into that in the next slide a little more in detail. And usually, yeah, as mentioned before, you can do a bachelor's and a master's, but there's no PhD offered in applied sciences. And now, and the amount of time approximately for each of them is, you can see on the slide. Now, there we go. So I'm going to go into briefly the university I'm studying at. So I study at Code University, as mentioned, and what makes the place I study, I think, special is that it has a really, really, really heavy focus on projects. That's actually the only way that we're assessed. So our assessments are not like your typical exams. It's rather hand-in, so documentation that you have to hand in, or a video or something where you are explaining and reflecting on how you've applied the knowledge of your study program to the project you're working on. And the projects are focused around real-world problems. So for example, last semester I worked on a project that, so it's actually an idea I had myself, of a game that teaches people how to, or like that tries to teach, I guess, tries to change people's view towards climate change and shows them what kind of behavior is beneficial towards combating climate change and how we can better improve the actions we take on a daily basis to be more eco-friendly. And so while the project can really be anything from an app to a website, just any technical product, I find it very cool that they're really focused on the real world, so not just theoretical things that one could build or one could invent, but really hands-on, let's go build this game, or let's go develop this website. And additionally, we work in teams, so it really gets you prepared for real-world job careers, in the sense that you're going to have to work with other people sooner or later in your life, and this is something we are put in touch with very early on already. And yeah, pretty much what I find most inspiring about the university I'm at is that we are working in a place of innovation. Like, we students constantly get to see new ideas and new projects coming to life and failing, but then also succeeding, and then learning a little bit more of like, okay, this didn't work out, how can I do it better? And it's not seen as a failure if you fail, but rather as a way to improve. And I know that might sound weird, but mistakes that you make are actually seen as a good thing, in a sense, in your assessments, for example, because it shows that you reflected on what went well and what didn't go well. And as long as you can explain like why it didn't go well and what you could do better in the future, that is actually seen as like a positive thing, let's say. So enough fangirling about my university. I hope you got a little bit more clear understanding of what I'm studying. So for you, I can really recommend, if you're not so sure yet what you want to study, or whether like traditional university or a university of applied sciences is more fitting to you and your personality, I can really recommend taking some online tests, or there are even like companies that provide this kind of service where you can see what kind of study program, what kind of university could fit well with your personality. And that's just something that I think if I had known it existed earlier on, would have certainly done, because I felt quite lost at the end of my studies until I came across this university. And yes, this is just one example of a site that offers this personality test. Now on to the second topic, which again is unrelated, but something I'm super, super passionate about. And so part of my studies of product management, I will go into, since I see there is a question, what product management is after this, is consumer psychology. And what this is looking at is how we humans interact with our products. So like looking at the psychology of humans, how our brains work, how we work as people, and how products play into that. And one of the ways in which this becomes relevant is through dark patterns. Dark patterns are, in a sense, the unethical or dark side of the fact that like the people behind the products that you consume understand how you think and how you work as a human, because we have a lot of similar tendencies as humans. And so what dark patterns are is they're tricks that are used by websites and apps to mislead or manipulate users. So I'm guessing all of you have consumed products of some sorts, and they manipulated you to do something you may not actually want to do, but that benefits the business. And there are a few examples I'd love to share with you. And for any of you that find this super interesting, as Nicolina mentioned, it's something I will be teaching about and doing with you in your project in next Summer School of Science S3++. And yeah, that said, I'm going to start right in. So did you know that you actually can't delete your Amazon account? And you might be thinking, no, what are you talking about? Of course I can. Well, no, you actually can't. And what I mean by this is, try to find the place to delete your Amazon account. You will not find it unless you like Google a little more and Google even some more. And then you might find finally it will tell you, okay, you actually need to go to contact Amazon and ask them to delete your account. And that's how it actually is also for the very program where we're using right now, AirMeet. AirMeet actually also, I noticed this accidentally, doesn't allow you to delete your own data and your own account. They have to do it for you. So you have to request them to delete your account. And so this is because it, of course, benefits the business, the company, if you are staying using their product, using their service, right? But it isn't benefiting you as a user because you are not really in control of your data in that sense, right? And this is where dark patterns become unethical, right? Or where they kind of show the dark side of companies. And another type of dark pattern is, for example, LinkedIn, Facebook. You probably noticed when you were signing up for these that you have to give a lot of information, and otherwise they don't allow you to even enter the service, right? They don't actually need all that information, right? They just know that they can get it from you because you want to join their service. And again, it's beneficial for them to have this information because then they can better target you with ads and target you with posts. But it's not actually necessary for the service itself. It's just something they're doing because it benefits them. And last but not least, this is something you'll experience every day if you ever try to go on any site. With cookies, you'll probably notice, so not actual edible cookies, but cookies that are on websites, you will have noticed probably that you have to accept them or not accept them. And to reject them takes so much more time, so much more effort than accepting them all, right? It doesn't have to be that way. It's that way because, again, it benefits them to have your data. And this is just one other example of how the design of the products that you're using is then designed in such a way to make it easier for them to use your information, use your data for their own purposes, usually to make money, right? And so this is just one of the many things I'm studying currently that I find super fascinating, and I wanted to share it with you because I think it gives you the chance to now more consciously consume products and also understand how they might be trying to manipulate you in a sense. Yes, thank you so much. There is one more example if you're super interested in this, but I will keep it, like I will only add it if people would like me to. Yes, no, maybe. Okay, I see some thumbs up. This last example is you've probably experienced while booking a flight or even booking train tickets or something like this, that they want to give you insurance. Like they want to give you some kind of insurance for your car, and then also like the car you would use afterwards, but then also for your baggage and yourself, and everything needs insurance of sorts, right? And in most cases, I assume that you don't actually want this insurance, but they make it really hard for you to opt out of the insurance. And in this example, you can see, for example, that, well, I'm saying example a lot anyway, that you have to go to, please select a country of residence in order to get to the button where you can click, don't insure me. Like, how crazy is that, right? And I've certainly experienced things like this before, where you don't know how to get away from this insurance, or how to not. So opt out just means like that you don't want to do it, right? And this is an approach that a lot of services and products use, is they say, hey, you're opting into all of this, so like, hey, you want to do all these things, right? Instead of asking, what things would you like to do, right? And so they'll assume that you want all these things that are benefiting them and giving them money, instead of asking you whether you actually want to do this. And so this is opt-in above, so opting out above opt-in. And what that just means is you have to actually consciously say no, 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 no to all these things, instead of saying yes to them. And I hope that makes sense somewhat and wasn't just really confusing what I just said. But in other words, the way these things are designed, they don't need to be designed this way. They're designed this way because it's what brings most profit to the businesses out there. And they're not, unfortunately, with the consumer's health and priorities and needs in mind. Yeah, that was it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Julia. So there is a bunch of questions for you. So let's start from the beginning. Just shortly, what is product management? Did you kind of already answer that in your talk, or not really?
The product management thing?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my internet is slightly unstable, so I'm having some issues, but I hope you understand me.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So product management, I think the easiest way to explain it is, so Code University of Applied Sciences is a tech university, so we're focusing on digital products. But what the product manager does in this context is they focus kind of on the strategy and the business side of the product. So how do we get the product to be successful? How do we get it to enter a market and then also be used by people? And how do we make sure it's like used in long term? And so it's really just about this kind of strategic side and business side of the products and services we interact with on a daily basis. So that's what I'm studying.
So while you're speaking about your university and studies, I actually have a question. So I think most of us kind of just went to the university by picking the thing that we like. And we weren't really thinking about the steps behind, like if I'm going to do a PhD or not. So do you already now, did you know before going to university that you really don't want to do a PhD? So it was an easy choice to go for the applied sciences? Or how did it work for you?
True, very good point. No, I didn't actually know that there was no opportunity to do a PhD when taking the studies. And additionally, I didn't really think about whether I wanted to do a PhD or not. I think I was more leaning on the side of not doing one because, as mentioned, at least I think I mentioned it, I am someone who really enjoys practical, like hands-on work. And also in school, I noticed that I couldn't memorize information very well if I just heard it and then had to like write it again on exams or something. The way I really enjoyed learning and learned best was through applying the knowledge I was learning. So either by working on it somehow or by trying it out, stuff like that. And so I knew after my studies that I wanted to do something that allowed me to interact with what I'm learning as much as possible. And this is why a University of Applied Science was the most attractive to me. What was important for me, though, too, which is a little different from other applied science universities, is I still wanted a lot of options after my studies of what career to go into, because I'm not actually sure yet what exactly I want to do. And I can also imagine doing pursuing a lot of different careers afterwards. And what I really enjoy about the whole and like going into tech is that I think technology is something that's applicable to almost every field these days, if not every. And I can end up working at a company that's developing like the next spaceship, that even better than Tesla's, or I can end up working, with some local human rights like movement or something, I find that there are so many options with what I'm studying currently, and that's, I think, my main motivation around studying in tech and studying in applied sciences.
Okay. So the next question is more onto the second part of your talk. So the question is, do companies actually benefit from inactive users? For example, if I have an account, but I never ever use it again.
Yeah, no, they don't benefit from inactive users, but the whole point of keeping you on board is that you may also experience this is you'll probably continue receiving emails from Amazon even if you're not using it anymore. And that's because they want to remind you to go back onto Amazon or go back and use this thing. And so by not letting you delete your data and delete things, it's about trying to keep you interested, trying to keep you on board. And of course, if you unsubscribe from the emails and really manage to never hear from them again, then it's kind of a heavy or dead weight for them. But at the same time, that's usually not the case. You'll probably usually find it very hard to completely stop the communication from them in all forms.
Okay. The next question is, what do you think about the new developments such as GDPR? Is it going into the right direction?
Oof, we're getting I like it. All right. Yes, I think it's going in the right direction, but I think there's still a lot to be done. And I mean, I certainly heard that there are in other countries in the world, not even cookie policies and stuff. So like things where these kind of things aren't even considered, or they don't even ask you. And that certainly I would consider worse. But on the other hand, yeah, it's a slow process, and I think if there weren't so much bureaucracy involved, but this is just my personal opinion, it would go a little bit faster. And of course, it's difficult for companies because I have to look at things from like a company's perspective, because I'm one of the people building products and services, through my university, but then also looking from a consumer's perspective, because I'm a consumer of tons of products. And it's just interesting to balance between, okay, what are companies benefiting from, what can I benefit from when creating product, but what is really going too far, or like stealing things from a user, or making them do things that they don't actually want to do, or that they're not even aware they're doing. And I think that's where GDPR can improve a bit more in terms of making things even more transparent as to what data exactly is being collected about you, and making it also just easy to read, easy to understand, without having to go through tons of terms and conditions and stuff like this.
Which everyone always reads.
Duh.
Okay, one very last question, because we're kind of running out of time. So do you have, just briefly, any other examples of dark patterns? And do you actually know how companies got the idea of using them?
That's a great question. I would say, because I don't want to take up more than my fair share of time, there's so many other things out there, and so many ways in which I was shocked when I was studying this. I did share, I think, the most known ones in terms of like with companies that are most known. Another one I found very shocking is LinkedIn, in case you haven't experienced this yourself, used to, when you signed up, automatically email all your contacts to join LinkedIn as well. And you wouldn't even understand why. And that's because they had in their sign-up process something where you had to like unsubscribe from or unclick, please don't email my contacts. And no one did that because they didn't realize. And they got into a huge lawsuit because of this. But you can find the video, like you can just Google this and find tons more examples of this. But that was like super shocking to know that LinkedIn actually like was that evil in a sense. And the other part of the question was just like how companies came up with the idea. Well, it's like, as you may have noticed, companies' products and services have gotten more and more targeted and specialized to really understand people's needs and people's kind of what they why they're using this product. And along with that came with understanding people's psychology. And there is a guy, unfortunately, I forgot his name, but if I remember, I can write it to you, who then coined this term dark patterns when he realized that more and more companies were actually trying to go into understanding, oh, people have these kind of habits, or they get addicted to things in this way, and try to play on that with the way they designed their products. But there's a great video on this that can go into more detail that I'm happy to share with you.
Okay. So thank you once more. And again, if you have another question for Julia or want to discuss something else, you can always find her at the tables or private message her. So thank you, Julia. Our next speaker is Srinath. Srinath first joined S3 in 2018 as a project leader, and he was supposed to also lead the project this year, but the school was cancelled. Otherwise, he's a chemist who did his PhD in Singapore, and now is finishing his postdoc in Belgium. So his talk is going to be a bit about his background, plus a bit about what he's doing at the moment. So the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Nina. Thanks for the introduction, and it's great to see you all again. This is my first time I'm actually giving a Zoom meeting, and one of the things about giving a Zoom meeting is there's no feedback. I thought there wouldn't be any feedback, but now I see like thumbs up and hearts and all that, so it's actually quite nice. It's a nice experience, and thank you all for that. So I will quickly jump into what I wanted to talk about, and I have to share my screen. Okay, so can you all see me?
Yes, all works.
Okay, because okay, yeah, right. So I was going to be talking to you about what I call Nano-tango and other molecular dances. This is related to the research that I do, but what I actually wanted to convey was that the end message that I wanted to give is something similar to what Nikola or Julia have talked about, and I will come to that at the end of the talk. So what I wanted to do was tell you a story of the field that I am in, and I think the story is related to all other stories that you can hear in sciences or any other field, that there is always some history, interesting history, which connects the past to the present. So a little bit about myself. I did my bachelor's in industrial biotechnology from India. And in India, this particular discipline is actually an engineering degree. Then I went to Singapore to do a PhD in biological sciences. And now I'm a postdoc in Leuven in Belgium, where I do protein biophysics and biochemistry. I'll get into a little bit about what all these things mean a little bit later in the talk. So professionally, I like to call myself a scientist, but in reality, I actually spend a lot of my days looking for these molecular dances. Outside my work, in my mind, I'm a lot more things. I think I am a sportsperson, traveler, video game enthusiast, student of human culture, musician as well recently. But then when Sindhuja, who was a co-project leader with me, saw what I had written here, she actually told me that I also suffer from delusions of grandeur. That's what I really am. But one of the great experiences in my life was actually being a S3 project leader, where you see our group, we had a lot of fun, and this is an experience that I'll never forget. And I jumped at the opportunity to be able to talk to you again and meet you all again. I wish we could have had another, been a part of another S3 this year, but the circumstances changed. But this has been a great avenue to catch up again. So I would now like to jump into story time and what I wanted to talk to you about. Every story, whenever you hear about modern life sciences, always starts with Darwin or Wallace and their theory of natural selection, and then about Mendelian inheritance. Darwin's theory of natural selection basically says that species evolve over time to adapt to their environment, and there is a natural selection process where the species that are more adapted to their environment survive, while the ones that cannot are weeded away. Mendelian inheritance tells you how information can be passed from parent to offspring. Together, the postulate at that time, Darwin was actually a very smart man. He actually came up with, his question was, what is the nature of this? How is information passed from parent to offspring? So his theory in those days, which was the cutting edge theory in its time, was that all the information in your cells sort of collect your gonads, or any organism collects to the gonads, and through sexual reproduction is transferred on to the offspring. And then again, all that information is collected to the gonads and transferred on. The information, he called it as gemmules. And this idea sort of stuck in everyone's mind that there must be something that is transferred from one offspring to one parent to offspring. It cannot be magic. It cannot be that it just happens by chance. There has to be a molecule that is transferred. I'm sorry, is the presenter view shown for you, or is it just for me when I share this?
So now we can also see the next slide. Before it was the...
okay, so I just wanted to confirm that. I'm sorry, just I'll... Okay, so the idea was the information had to be encoded in molecules, and molecules meaning it had to be chemical in nature. You can easily understand taking a hard disk from one computer to another, and you have a hard disk that you transfer. But there is no hard disk. There is no pen drive that we're talking about. It has to be chemical. The data has to be encoded in chemicals. And it took a while. Now we know it, of course, that this chemical was actually DNA. But it took about 40, 50 years of some of the most amazing experiments done in flies and other organisms, that the scientists could actually pinpoint that the DNA is where the data is encoded. So once that happened, the next step was basically looking at life itself. All of life is basically a bag of chemicals that are interacting with one another. There is an equilibrium between these chemicals, and how this equilibrium changes defines how life progresses, was how people thought about it. And there was this paradigm shift, because to think of life in this way, it's a complex series of interactions, and all these interactions are governed by the laws of physics and chemistry. So now physicists and chemists started coming into biology, and rather than looking at organisms, the focus shifted to looking at what are the nature of these molecules. How is a molecule able to hold information? What is this information translate? So what if there is information? So for instance, I could transfer a software from one computer to another, but until I run the software, there is no meaning to it. So in terms of the human body, or in terms of the natural life sciences, we know the information is coded in DNA. But what is the information? What is the .exe file that the DNA is leading to? And these were the next questions that were being asked. So this paradigm shift was actually the birth of what is called molecular biology, where all of biology is looked at in terms of molecules coming together and meeting each other. But the most amazing thing about this was that the birth of molecular biology was that you needed some of the leading physicists and chemists to come together to actually progress the field, progress biology further. Physicists would provide the analytical tools, for instance, fluorescence, microscopy, or X-ray diffraction, while chemists actually understand how these chemicals interact and understand the processes. They provide the analysis, and biology was changed forever. One of the birthplaces of this modern molecular biology was in the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge, in the UK, which was headed by Professor Lawrence Bragg, who was a Nobel Prize winner in physics for discovering Bragg diffraction in crystals, diffraction of X-rays in crystals. So you would not think that such a place would actually lead to such remarkable advances in biology, but that was the case. This was the place that now has led to so many Nobel Prizes and some of the most important discoveries in the life sciences field. And two of these discoveries actually happened almost right next to each other. They happened in the same place and around the same time. The first one was the discovery of the DNA helix by Watson, Crick, Wilkins, and Franklin. When they finally discovered the structure of the DNA with its classic double helix pattern and its base pairing, where complementary bases are bound to each other and the data is actually coded along these base pairs, James Watson, one of the discoverers, basically said, it is so pretty, it had to exist. There's a little bit of poetic, license that has been given. It is so pretty that it had to exist. And it is a pretty molecule. But I would like to stress one point. The DNA is an information, a place where information is stored. It is basically the hard disk. Every single cell in our body, well, not every single cell, but most of the cells in our body hold DNA, and they pass it on to when they split and produce new cells. So the next question was, what is happening with the DNA? The DNA is basically a data source. So it keeps replicating, it makes itself. So it's basically a hard disk that can copy itself, make multiple copies. It's a RAID drive, basically. You make 16 copies of it, 20 copies of it, a million copies of it. But what the information is done, how is it transferred to function, to actually a .exe file, if you may, is that it is converted to another molecule called RNA, which is then converted or translated into proteins. And proteins are where the real business of life occurs. This is where real chemistry occurs. This is called the central dogma of molecular biology. DNA replicates itself, but can be transcribed into RNA. RNA is then translated into proteins. And proteins are the ones that are able to catalyze the processes that the cell requires. So around the same time the DNA helix was discovered, the structure, scientists in the Cavendish laboratory were also trying to find out the structure of proteins, how they look. And they use the same techniques. X-ray crystallography was one of the techniques, and other physics tools that were used in physics and chemistry were again applied to solve the structure, look at how proteins look. Now, when the DNA structure was solved and they saw this elegant repeating pattern, they assumed that the proteins would also be somewhat similarly elegantly structured. There'll be some sort of order and there'll be some sort of sense to the structure. So they first looked at two proteins. One is sperm whale myoglobin and hemoglobin. Now, the reason they chose these proteins is actually quite interesting. Sperm whale myoglobin is, first of all, myoglobin is a protein that is in your muscles, in your hands, legs, the skeletal muscles. What myoglobin does is it binds to oxygen. So when you are trying to run or when you're doing physical activities, your muscles are consuming oxygen. That oxygen is actually held by myoglobin. So the myoglobin in your muscles is a store for oxygen. Now, why they went for sperm whale is very interesting, because sperm whales they dive deep underwater. They can stay underwater for 30 minutes, 1 hour, and they can go really deep, 3,000 meters. So the myoglobin, they have a much richer amounts of myoglobin in their muscles. The next interesting point that also contributed to this was, these were the years just after World War II, where meat was actually in scarcity in the UK and in Europe at that time. So the government was trying to encourage people to consume whale meat, which they could capture, and there were sizable number of them. And of course, the whaling laws were not as strict and properly strict at that time. The conservation laws were pretty ridiculous at that time. So there was actually a sizable store of whale meat available for them to be able to. So what they took was, they took all this whale meat they had sitting in the freezers and just chopped them down and extracted myoglobin by large amounts of it. They also looked at hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin, if I'm sure you know, is actually one of the key proteins in your blood. It is the protein that binds to oxygen. It binds to oxygen in the lungs and then transports it to the rest of the body and releases the oxygen. So again, you could produce a lot of hemoglobin. You just have to extract blood, and you could produce a large amount of it. So these were very interesting, smart choices that they made on choosing the proteins. Other groups used other proteins which are also equally prevalent or equally abundant. But these choices seem to help, because they were able to create the first crystals, first structures of proteins from these two proteins. So now this is what happened. When they finally solved the structure, it sort of looked like this. And I know basically these were the actual responses from the scientific community. It's a horrible object, but beautiful work. It looked like a worm, abdominal viscera, like a dog quietly huddled up. No one was, remember, these were all in scientific journals or in scientific conversations. No one wanted to directly say it looked like a pile of shit. But ultimately it was that. And the scientists who actually found the structure, were slightly disappointed that we expected more order in here. Why does it look all so jumbled up? What is the problem? But what they did see was the moiety that actually binds oxygen, which is actually iron in a ring form called heme, is actually sitting in the center of the protein. So there is some sense to what is happening. So myoglobin, as I told you, exists in skeletal muscles. So in this picture, sorry, I just have to go back one slide. This being the first protein that was solved, the scientific community also didn't know, how are we going to show these molecules? They came up with this method to say, okay, this is how they look. But in actuality, as the more and more of these proteins were solved, the artists actually came up with better ways of showing this. So instead of looking at a pile of shit, it actually looked like a very nice artistic molecule, which actually contains information that is important to a chemist. So for instance, here, the green is, of course, the protein. The red is the heme, which contains the ion where the oxygen binds. So when you can solve the structure, you start understanding the chemical nature of how oxygen binds to this protein, where it sits, how it is able to interact and influence with the rest of the molecules. So the chemist can really now get into understanding what is happening. So around the same time, there was this new concept in structural biology. The understanding of protein structures is that each protein has a sequence. This sequence sort of comes together, which we call protein folding, folds up to make this molecule, which has a final three-dimensional structure. And that three-dimensional structure is absolutely essential for function. So what we call it sequence, structure, function, just like DNA, RNA, protein. Similarly, there is a dogma, there is a central line of information. The sequence defines how the protein structure looks, and the structure defines how the protein's function is. And this was very important because earlier people understood what a protein's function was, but how did it do its function? What is the chemical nature of it? That was unknown until scientists were able to solve these structures and then see that the sequence directly governs how the structure is. So it's not magic. Everything has sense. Everything is related to one. Every piece of information is related to one another. So,
Srinath, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but beware that you're kind of running out of time.
Okay, sure. I'll quickly. I think I'm somewhere close to done in 5 minutes. So,
can you make it?
Hemoglobin and myoglobin are similar. They both bind oxygen, but where and when they bind oxygen is kind of different. For instance, myoglobin binds it in blue. It binds it very easily, but hemoglobin, the oxygen pressure defines how well it binds oxygen. So in arteries where the oxygen pressure is higher, partial pressure is higher, it binds it quite nicely in purple. But as it goes to the veins where the oxygen pressure is lower, it starts releasing oxygen. And this is very important for life. I just wanted to take a quick, segue where Edward Muybridge this was the first video ever generated of a horse galloping. And only after the video was generated, people were able to see that when the horse gallops, actually at one point in time, all 4 legs are off the ground. So static images are great, but dynamic motions, videos are where the information lies. So when you look at hemoglobin, you start looking at how these conformations change. In one conformation, it is binding oxygen. In another conformation, it releases oxygen. So each conformation of the protein has a specific function, and there are motions all the time. So from these different conformations, you start having protein motions, and this together is called protein dynamics. The speed and rate at which these motions occur defines the function of a protein. Now, this is where we start looking at molecular dances. This is the protein I actually work on. And when I first time I looked at it, I thought it actually looked like the Cossack Russian dance. And then I started looking for more of these dances. This is a very famous protein called kinesin, which is transporting this vesicle. So this long, X-shaped protein is transporting this vesicle along these microtubules. It's called a motor protein. And as you can see, the steps look very much like a tango. It's just tangoing along the microtubule. And sometimes you come across proteins that are folding, but the dance is not that elegant. It's still something is happening, and it is a dance. And I love all of these dances. So the point I wanted to make was the cell is a very complex world, world of rhythm and dance. It's a fascinating world, and the only way to understand this world is we have to combine as many tools, as many techniques, as many ways of thinking as we can to bring together a final picture of how these things look. And we have barely scratched the surface as scientists. of how the life works. So the main aim of the talk I wanted to say is the natural world is complex, of course. Only through collaboration and cooperation can we hope to progress. What we are, say I call myself a physicist or a chemist or a biologist, only defines how we approach problems. But your skills can be applied to any field of expertise. And that is where I wanted to say, where this is the same theme of what Nikola and Julia were saying, is that you can approach a problem in multiple ways. You have to be unafraid to explore new avenues and new options. And sometimes your new ideas might be the breath of fresh air that a field requires. So I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you find something that you're passionate about and that gives meaning to what you want to see and learn. Yep, that's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. This was really like a shout out to interdisciplinarity. So we're totally out of time, and I think we're gonna have to leave most of the questions for direct chats with you.
Sure.
I have just one maybe. So do you feel personally that you've changed the field? I mean, do you feel like you were changing fields along your scientific pathway? And was it tough to adjust to this kind of new environments along the way?
So when changing fields, more than that, changing cultures was the tough thing. So going from one country to another, the way that people do science is different in each country, and it's important to learn that. So when transferring from different cultures, it was more difficult than transferring fields as such, and understanding what is the priorities of each different scientist or each different group of scientists or scientific culture was one of the key things that I learned in making all these travels. And that's one thing that was most difficult for me.
Okay. So as I said, most of the questions will have to be answered afterwards. Okay. So thank you once again, Srinath. And we're moving to our last speaker today, which is Matija. So Matija is a physicist who finished his PhD in, I think, 2 years ago or a year ago.
A year ago.
Actually,
yeah, a bit more than a year. Anyway.
And then stepped outside of this academic world to the unknown. So he's now working as a consultant, and he's going to try to convince us it's not as different from academia as we may think. So the floor is yours, Matija.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. I'm going to now start sharing, and let's see how the whole thing develops together. So I will start by assuming that you all can see what I'm doing, and as I get a nice little notification that the Meet is sharing a window, if there's a problem, please shout out. So what I want to talk to you about today, and I feel quite bad coming after such a nice scientific talk, is what does a consultant do, and why is it not so different from what does an academic do? So now those who know what consulting is might say like, wait, what? But those who don't, I hope you will learn and then pass on that it's not as different as you might think. Our agenda for today is I will go through 3 things. First, a bit of introduction to those who don't know me on what I did, what my background is, and what's the current status of where I am. Then I will jump into the main part of what are the key similarities between academia and consulting. And last, I hope that we can play a little game where I will give you a few situations that I've experienced, and you can see if I've done it during the PhD or during my consulting job, just to kind of drive a bit more concretely the point that it's not so different. And as with other talks, we will have a Q&A after, and I would hope that we can go through the presentation a bit faster to have a bit more time for the Q&A, as I find that the most interesting part about these webinars and discussions. So as a bit of background, what I studied was physics, and what you can see on the left is an image from my PhD defense right after, where in Switzerland there is the tradition of getting a doctoral hat. I completed my PhD at ETH in Zurich after completing my master's degree at the University of Zagreb in Croatia, where I'm from. So what you can see on the top of the hat is a Death Star, which represented the helium atom that I was trying to trap and control its motion in these cardboard aluminum foil covered rods that represented my research. During that time in my life, I also engaged with the S3, namely the S3++, in two different capacities. Once as a project leader, and that's the center picture, with my great team on how to manipulate magnets and what you can learn with them, or basically magnets and how do they work. And on the right, a picture that is from the first day of the S3++ in 2017, where Petra and I are kind of explaining what is going to happen to all of you that were in S3++ 2017, and how are you going to get assigned to teams. Both of these were pretty amazing, and also my PhD was pretty amazing, and it got me to think about what I actually wanted to do in life. Sort of what Nikola was saying about building a meaningful life in the future. What I wanted to do and what I saw that was necessary is to have a really nice environment to do research, which I had during my PhD. I had some of the best infrastructure that I could imagine, money that I could get whatever equipment I needed, environment that was really suited to what I needed to do, which even though my PhD lasted for quite a bit of time, I managed to do quite a lot. So I built 4 different experimental setups in atomic physics from scratch, which I think if I couldn't have done it at ETH, I probably couldn't have been able to do it anywhere. And also during S3++, while trying to put together all the equipment that is necessary for all the projects, I've really realized just how important research infrastructure is. And I've kind of put it as my goal in life to improve it, to make it better worldwide, and to allow every scientist to have the best possible research infrastructure. So naturally, the next thing that I did was the best part of going and joining McKinsey Company as a consultant. The question is kind of why and what's the point? And the first question that needs to be answered here is, what does a consultant actually do? In a nutshell, a consultant is a borrowed brain for a company that can do something that they either don't have the time to or don't have the capabilities to do. And while working at McKinsey Company, this is what I've been doing over the last 10 months. I've worked in different sectors on different projects, mainly borrowing my intellectual brain power to solve problems that companies would have. Whether it's how to redo a kind of company strategy for clinical trials, or how to improve and do a commercial turnaround and increase profitability of a company. Now, I guess given the online nature of this and the fact that I can't see you, you might be Googling on the side what McKinsey Company does and what kind of rumors there are around it. There is a pretty wide amount of rumors that McKinsey Company does, and I will not go into that until later in the questions. But what I want to point out is that during this work, you get to interact usually with CEOs of companies. You get to learn how to manage projects. You get to learn how to manage finances. And this is actually what feeds into what I want to do and to improve infrastructure. I need the knowledge of how to manage projects, especially large, financially demanding projects such as infrastructure ones. I need to learn how to manage finances and how to monitor the flow of money. But lastly, I need to get to know people who have influence and have the money to finance all of that. And those are usually those CEOs of companies that can make this happen. So through consulting, through McKinsey Company, I found the fastest way to bring all of these 3 things together in order to get my goal kind of in the level. To give this a bit more current actual time setup, what I expected to do was travel around the world and get to meet all of these people in person, discuss work in kind of these close-knit environments, and get things done. What I got was 10 months in my home, approximately in this position, working on my laptop or on my big screen on projects remotely. I have not seen a client until approximately end of October because none of them used their cameras. I have seen my colleagues, but I have not met a colleague until about 4 months into the job of actual work. So what that taught me, on the other hand, was that we can do our jobs completely remotely and still be able to further on this kind of aspect of business. What I'm now lacking is the contact with people that I hope to rebuild in the next, let's say, next year. Let's hope that it works like that. Now that I've explained a bit on what a consultant does, what is expected, and how and why I want to do that, I did also have a bit of time to think that it's quite similar to what I've done before. So I found three key areas of similarity between academia and consulting. And those of you who've done PhDs would be able to see this, but also those who are still doing university or even high school, it gives you a bit of a glimpse of what it can be like. First of all, it's project-based work. I mentioned before that I did several projects in different industries, and that's kind of what we do all the time. All of our work is based on different projects for different clients. And there is at no point like a continuous thing that you need to do all the time. What happens to you in between projects is basically up to your liking. It's not really that relevant where you are and what you do, but the moment that the project is on, you get to work on a project. And this is sort of what happens in a PhD as well. So as I said, I built 4 different setups, and those 4 different setups were for 4 different projects that are later on combined into my thesis. And different disciplines also have different projects, but generally every project you could say that is equal to a paper that you publish. Next, up or out advancement with regular review cycles. What does that mean? It means that you either get promoted or you get fired. And so far, that's kind of also how academia works as well. You either get promoted to a postdoc or you don't complete your PhD. If you continue on, you either get promoted to an assistant professor or you don't go into academia further. As an assistant professor, you're on a tenure track, and then you're either promoted to full professor or you don't continue working at that university. And all of this is done pretty regularly in a review cycle. So for PhDs, I think a regular amount of time is every year. Usually there's a committee meeting where you get to present how far have you progressed? Is that sufficient? Do you get to continue? If it's not, you're usually moved out. For us, this is every 6 months. So every 6 months, I get a review of my performance in the previous 6 months, and they get to see whether I continue or I do not. I get asked to leave or fired in that case. There's a lot of jargon that we can go into a bit later, but that is kind of how things can look out. And last, that I actually want to go into a bit more, is the team structure. So a consulting team and a research group are very similar in their structure, in the sense that there are 3 main levels. A partner that is usually ultimately responsible for the project. They're also the person who provides sort of high-level input, like, I think you should go into that, I think you should look into this. Because they've done a lot of projects in that field, they usually have a good intuition of what should be looked into, what is relevant, what is not. And that is generally the role that a professor or a PI does in your PhD or in your master's project or in any kind of academic project. Then you have the person who actually manages the day-to-day operations. We call it the team lead, engagement manager, however you want to go about it. But they're the ones who kind of organize and schedule work, provide coaching much more directly because they're much more in the know. They've kind of done the PhD, they know a bit more, and they can do it very quickly, but they can also now get the responsibility of managing usually just one project, but also can manage a few others. They also manage various stakeholders like clients, partners, junior consultants, and so on. And then that is what in a research group would be sort of like a postdoc's role. And then on the bottom rung are the consultants. They're the ones who do the actual groundwork. And they're the ones who get to learn during the process so that they can advance and move towards team lead and eventually partner. And those are the PhD or master students that kind of come into the work and then actually sit for 12 hours next to a laser and operate it, or do pipetting, or prepare reactions, or just wait until everything is done. And just by going through this, I kind of realized, well, yeah, it kind of makes the most sense for a project-based workforce to go down this road. So now after that, what I would like to do, or for us to do, is to create a bit more interactivity and try to play a game. So I've kind of get five different situations, and I would like you to go to menti.com on your phone and use a code that is presented there. And we'll get to see if some of these situations have happened to me during the PhD, or the consulting job, or both. Why I want to do this is to bring you a bit closer into how it actually worked for me during the previous 6 years of the PhD, or during the last 10 months of the job. So now let's see how this will work. I'm hoping that you can see the screen. So I'm going to show it. I'm going to show it on the screen. Don't worry. 9878723.
So we don't see your screen at the moment.
All right. Because I'm seeing Google Chrome is not responding. This is going great. Oof, exactly. A massive oof on this one. This is kind of the McKinsey presentation skills that are now gone completely off the level.
So for me, it's working. I managed to insert the code, and I'm now waiting for it to start.
Okay. Good to hear that. The unfortunate thing is that I can't access the Chrome tab in which the part is going. So what I would actually like to do now is that we skip this and go directly into questions, because quite frankly, it will waste time for everything to restart and go again. So let's close on this, and I get to tell you the experiences during question time, or we can just discuss it casually.
Do you know the questions you had in the poll by heart?
Yeah, pretty much.
Because we can also use the reactions at the bottom to kind of vote, like smile and heart or something.
Sure, sure. So the first one was the need to work on the weekends. If you thought that I would need to do it only during my PhD, I guess a heart, thumbs up. If only during consulting, a blue heart for the McKinsey blue color. And if during both, you can clap your hands. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of clapping hands, more than the others. What I would say is that I had to do it actually only during the PhD. During McKinsey, there was never a need to work during the weekend. Both the team and the partner would all just say, okay, guys, weekend is sacrosanct. We will not touch this. Close your laptops, go away. See you on Monday. There was never a need that was so great that required work on the weekends. So that's a good one. Next, the second one was I got regular feedback on my progress. Again, if only during the PhD, thumbs up. If both, clapping hands, or if only in consulting, the hearts. And I see nobody thinking that it's only during the PhD. And kind of there's an equal amount of both and blue hearts. The answer to that is actually it was only during consulting. I have to say during my PhD, I never got regular feedback from my professor or from, anyone. It was kind of very ad hoc, very kind of, okay, let's see what you have, and then some kind of feedback. I have to say my professor wasn't really good at that. So sucks a bit. Next question was on the topic of I had to rewrite every single word of every report until leadership liked it the way they wanted. And leadership here being both partners or professors. So again, thumbs up is only PhD, blue heart is only consulting, and this is for both. Okay, I see mostly only during PhD. Actually, it's both. The PhD part is because my professor was extremely particular about everything that exited the group. So every thesis, paper, external presentation was scrutinized by him extensively so that you could kind of get really the right thing to say at the right time and in the right way. As for on the consulting side, the reason is that oftentimes we were working with very particular clients, and they were very sensitive on the messages that we would send. So leadership, or in this case partners, would be very particular on the choice of words so that we don't kind of send the wrong message at the wrong time, which is actually quite a big deal, unfortunately. All right, then next situation. Unfortunately, I can't remember more. I thought that I had everything in my mind, but those are the three that I found most appealing in this. So I would say we're now open to the regular questions. And again, as my Chrome is completely shut down, I can't even work the air meet. I don't see them, so I would kindly ask you, Nina, to go on to those. There was one question that I see in the live chat that actually stayed on the screen is how stressful is consulting? Honestly, less than a PhD. And that, I have to say, is on average. The peaks are much higher because there was oftentimes a situation where we had to respond quickly to a client demand, which science never, or nature never posed sudden demands, and neither did my professor. But clients, because they're human, that happens often enough. So the peaks were a bit higher, but on average, it's less stressful than the PhD.
Okay.
Any other, Nina, please.
I think I was looking at the same question as you. So,
okay.
question from Marike: did you actively ask for feedback or seek it elsewhere when your professor was not very good at it?
I was usually asking the postdoc that I was working with, but that was very ad hoc. It was also on situations like during the writing of a paper, for example, but never during regular work. And seek it elsewhere than, yeah, I think I answered both questions in the same part. And yeah, my professor was not really very good at giving feedback, unfortunately.
So besides how stressful it is, the consulting, Marcel also asks, are you working longer hours than you expected?
No. The working hours are about the same as the PhD, as I had during the PhD.
Okay, and
that's
how?
Why yeah.
Sorry. No.
That's why I would also say if you want to do consulting, I would recommend doing a PhD first, because you get used to the kind of way of working. You get used to the pace and the hours that are going on. Especially the way of working was probably the most useful thing that I've learned.
So it's actually possible to go for consulting without having a PhD.
Yeah. No, that's usually the preferred way of many people. If possible, I would ask you to do the other way, because you can always, the thing is, you can always go back kind of to consulting, but not really back to academia. So for those of you who were there yesterday for Jelena Pizza's talk, she had a very nice diagram where kind of you would go into academia and then you would continue, but crossing to industry was very easy. While if you were to go immediately to industry and continue, crossing back to academia was quite difficult. And in this case, it's also the same. And on the plus side, also, you get to benefit humankind by advancing science a bit. So I think it's definitely a good investment in that way.
Okay. So the project that you work on, how long do they usually last?
Usually about 8 to 12 weeks. So we measure the time in weeks and not in months, so on. So about 2 to 3 months, that would be the usual time. And there are many who are much shorter also, and a few who are much longer.
Okay. So one practical question, how do you manage to be and work in a Swiss university without speaking German or French?
You will learn German or French eventually, but there's no hard requirement for that. I had a particular situation in my group where I think 90% of my group when I came was German or Swiss German. So they would speak in German or Swiss German basically all the time. And only when there was a sufficient critical mass of us who did not speak German would they switch to English. So I learned to adapt pretty quickly. But that's a particular situation. I think you don't really need to speak English or speak German, of course, to be working as a PhD or even as a master's student in a Swiss university.
Okay. Now back to consulting. Who are the usual clients you work with?
I can't share that. I know this sounds horrible, but I can't name companies. But what you can imagine is usually companies that are pretty big and multinational. And this will sound very cynical, but it's also honest. It's those companies who can afford to have consultants, because consulting is sort of like a luxury item for a company. You get to borrow an external brain when you have usually sufficient amount of brains in the company, because you might like an external perspective or something that you don't have inside, but for a very unique or sometimes very whimsical purpose.
Okay. Now I'm not really sure what Anna meant with this question. So, okay. So I think she wants to ask, For the clients, what kind of areas do they work in? Is it like or which kind of companies?
Sorry.
Is it like pharma companies normally, or some different?
We cover kind of the entirety of business, given that we're a pretty large company, over 30,000 employees and over 160 offices around the world. So in Switzerland, the pharmaceutical sector is pretty strong. Banking and consumer goods are on the rise. So my personal, or the project that I've worked in, were in consumer goods, in pharma, and in technology so far. And different offices have different foci as well. So for example, London is much more into financial industries than the Dubai office. And the Dubai office is much more into oil and gas than, let's say, Zurich. And Zurich is much more into pharma than Zagreb or so on. Because that's given also by the local business environment.
Okay, I think that's it from the questions, at least for now. So you can again also contact Matija afterwards. So I think that finishes our mini talks session. So thanks once again to all the speakers. It was really inspiring and also informative, I think, for a lot of us. So the next thing on schedule is the speed networking, and please do opt in, do join, because it's way more fun that way. So yeah, I'll see you around in the chats and tables.
Bye everyone.
Bye bye.